So I'm back in Hawaii on the island of Oahu in Hawaiian Valley, and I'm here on the side of Mauna'ōhi Ridge, where we are trying to restore some of the native plants to this landscape. This entire ecosystem collapsed hundreds of years ago and was invaded by lots of invasive species. Here mostly guinea grass and some other stuff. But yeah, guinea grass is probably our main issue on this site. It grows really, really fast, really aggressive. So what we're trying to do is slowly replace that with the incredibly rare, endemic, native dryland species that once forested this whole area. And basically every plant that you're looking at up there on that hillside is a non-native invasive species. There's definitely some exceptions. I've been up there and there's little pockets of native plants that have somehow survived, because we have tons of feral pigs and goats and all kinds of weird things going on here. So it's kind of interesting to find little pockets of native diversity still remaining up there. But pretty much, I would say over 95% of this vegetation is non-native and considered invasive. A lot of guinea grass, a lot of what we call haulikoa, and then, all kinds of random things from around the world. There's a octopus tree, autograph tree, all kinds of weird things. And it's sort of forming this novel ecosystem, which is really interesting to think about, over long-term geologic or evolutionary timescales, what will happen, because these are now reproductively isolated from their original populations. A lot of these are from Australia or South America or just all over the world. Now that they've made it over here, either accidentally or purposefully introduced, they're no longer interbreeding with their original populations. So what'll happen over long time periods is they'll start to drift away genetically and start to form new species. So when you think about it that way, it's not so bad. But we're talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of years. Whereas in a matter of just a few centuries and decades even, we're losing all the native biodiversity. The native dryland habitat that once existed here is down to, I think, around 2% remaining. And those 2% are not really intact ecosystems. They're just little crumbs of habitat, and they rely on human beings for the most part to come in and disperse seeds and everything, because a lot of the seed dispersers, like birds, the native birds, they don't exist anymore. They went extinct. So it's a whole different thing here than where I'm working in New York or pretty much any other place that I've been. It's a really unique place, and there's a lot of different sort of challenges and methods, because we're dealing with a space where the native ecosystem is gone, completely collapsed, no longer exists. And we've had a total ecological collapse, which has led to tons of erosion. We've had massive loss of topsoil, which has washed down into the oceans. and then it has been completely replaced by non-native grasslands, which are fire prone. So if you're familiar with the devastating fires that took place in Maui recently, a lot of that is blamed on these grasses, which are just left to take over these neglected lands. You know, and so what we're trying to do here is bring back some native diversity, and then also kind of create like a little fire break for our house maybe. So you know, we own a little bit of this land here, just a really small little section, and I put a fence around it because we're having problems with the feral pigs coming down here and rummaging around through these native plants. So the fence has been working pretty great. It's up there. I can head up there right now. But I haven't been here in over a year, and we're entering the dry season. We're right now at the very tail end of the wet season. There's some clouds moving in, a little bit of moisture right now, but it's been generally really dry. Things are kind of winding down for the growing season. So I just want to kind of give a little tour. You know, I just arrived. This space has been mostly neglected. You know, my dad kind of sprays it with the hose every once in a while and keeps an eye on it, but for the most part he hasn't really done anything, which I think is good in some ways, because we've just sort of left it alone to see what'll happen, see what nature wants, and things are actually looking really good. You know, maybe not to you, you know, someone unfamiliar with it, but I've been looking around, poking around in here, and there's a lot of really interesting things going on. It's really exciting. So I just want to do, you know, a little tour around, and then, you know, while I'm here during my stay, I'm going to do some work, kind of weed this area and mulch around our plants and make it look all nice and stuff as it goes into the dry season. So I just want to get like some documentation of it, you know, before I start the work, in this state as it is now, kind of with all this like grass and everything. So yeah, essentially this whole landscape was once an incredibly diverse native ecosystem called a dryland forest, or a dry forest. Right here, we're sort of in a transition zone between the wetter mountains up there in the Ko'olau Mountains, and then sort of the drier leeward side here. So they call that the Mesic zone, right? It's not the xeric, it's not the driest dry where, you know, you get less than 10 inches of rain. It's more of in like the 30 to 40 inches of rain per year on average. And it's also, yeah, it's not the wettest where, you know, you get like hundreds of inches of rain up in the mountains. So it's kind of this little sweet spot where you can have, you know, tons of diversity. And these were some of the most diverse forests in the island chain. Unfortunately, they're also one of the most impacted by humans, because we kind of built, you know, our whole society here in this zone. So it's quite a challenge to try to bring back any sort of resemblance of, you know, a native ecosystem, especially one that's so highly fractured, you know, and may never really recover, because we've already lost some of the major components of this ecosystem. You know, like I mentioned, some of the birds that were highly specialized in pollinating and dispersing seeds for these plants, they went extinct. And so now, how can this plant, you know, reproduce? We have a lot of species that are called functionally extinct because they're no longer capable of surviving on their own, and they basically need our help, or, you know, one day some other bird will decide to maybe start to disperse those seeds, and you know, that'll take a long time probably. So what I've been doing is, you know, clearing out a lot of the non-native stuff and then building these kind of retention structures like this rock wall, which help to retain any soil, because we're still having pretty big problems with erosion. When the rains come, it just kind of washes everything down. But with these little rock walls and swales and things, we're able to retain a lot of that water and the, you know, organic material and start to build soil. So you can see a lot of the leaves depositing on top of this little terrace up here, and they're accumulating and breaking down into soil, which is really good. And then in here we have a mix of native and sort of non-native weedy species, and it's pretty cool to see. So these things have just been left alone through the dry, really dry period in the summer, and they've survived. So you can see right here a plant called Iliee plumbago that makes these really nice little white flowers. It looks like it's sort of winding down, like it had flowered already and I just missed it. Here's a little flower right there, but it makes these little sticky seeds that can like stick to birds and stuff, and that helps disperse them. So it doesn't look like much right now, but you can see all these little green stems. This plant, I think there's 2 or 3 plants in this area, but they are doing really well. And they're sort of surviving up here on their own and reproducing. You know, they're creating seeds. So that's a good sign. And then there's a few other things in here that are kind of hard to see, but there's an a'ali'i over there against the fence line. There's a willy willy in the middle there that dropped all of its leaves already. And then there's some ilima in there. And I also scattered a bunch of koa seeds, which koa is our native, is one of our 2 native acacia species. And it closely resembles this non-native, highly invasive species that I mentioned earlier, haole koa, which just means like the foreign koa. But it's really hard to tell them apart when they're seedlings. So that's a challenge because, you know, I scattered a bunch of seeds up here, all around here. And then, you know, I'm seeing stuff that could be koa, could be haole koa. Not really sure. So we're gonna just leave those, you know, and kind of wait until they're big enough to be able to tell if it's koa or haole koa. You know, and then the thing with the haole koa and the non-native, you know, invasive species, in my opinion, especially at a site like this where we are completely surrounded by a sea of them, I'm not too worried about removing them from our land because, you know, the damage is sort of already done. It's not like the few plants that are on our land are gonna impact the surrounding land, which is already completely invaded by them. So in some ways I'm just kind of welcoming them in certain areas, because at the end of the day, any plant is better than no plant, in my opinion. You know, the worst thing we could have is just bare soil. And, you know, the thing about these highly invasive plants is they're, you know, another way to think about it is that they're highly successful and incredibly resilient. They're able to survive in this habitat, you know, and it's really quite interesting, actually. These species in their original habitats are meant to do kind of exactly what they're doing right now, like pioneering highly disturbed sites. You know, there's definitely some negative impacts and everything, but having something to hold down the soil is better than nothing. And the haole koa is a nitrogen fixing legume, so, you know, we can use that to build soil. So any of these that are not actually koa and that are haole koa, I will leave for now and let them grow, and then one day probably just chop them down and let them decompose into soil. And I'm not too worried about, you know, them reproducing or anything, because there's already millions of them around here. Same goes with, you know, basically every other non-native plant. There's a few of them where they're like, okay, this thing is just way too aggressive, I need to like eradicate this thing. So but you know, for the most part, it's actually kind of interesting to invite tons of different diversity of different plants and animals all together in this unique combination that has never existed before. You know, it's this idea of a novel ecosystem. Just to kind of think about it, like, we have all kinds of weird things going on here. Like, we've got these lizards called anoles running around eating bugs and, you know, doing their thing. They're not native, but I think in this context they're great, you know, having little lizards running around and stuff. And they're probably, I think they're generalist predators, right? So they're eating ants and whatever, they're eating all kinds of stuff, so that's good. They're a little part of our novel ecosystem here. And you know, there's tons of other little examples. Like, we've got all kinds of non-native millipedes and weird things. So down here we sort of have another structure laid out on contour. It's mostly just kind of a loose stone wall with some branches and everything laid out on contour, and it's sort of helping to retain any water that's sheeting on the land and any of the organic material and soil. And then you can kind of see, like, in here, these are halicoas with those seed pods up there in the sky, and they grow really fast. You know, these weren't nearly this big when I was here last year, but we can use that to our advantage. We can cut that material and chop it up and drop it on the ground, and it'll break down into soil. It's also shading the land and, you know, helping in some ways, but in other ways it's sort of encroaching on our little native plants that we planted. So in here I'm on the next lower terrace, and we've planted a whole bunch of really cool things. This is Aveo, and this is a really gorgeous plant that is endemic to Hawaii. It's kind of a shrubby shrub that, you know, gets maybe like 4 or 5 feet tall and makes tons and tons of little seeds. And then right next to it we have what's called a koaya. This is the other member of the acacia family that's endemic to Hawaii. It's like a cousin of the koa, which is more well known. You know, a lot of people know about koa. It's a really valuable wood, and I guess fewer people know about its cousin koaya. It doesn't grow quite as tall. It's more of a low tree and kind of more in the drier music to xeric sides of the islands. So this one is doing really well. It's like 6 feet tall, and it's starting to put out its I can't remember what the botanical term is, but you know, you can see these little leaf structures here. These are the true leaves, and then as the plant gets older, it starts to create these, which I think are modified branch or something. I don't know. It's like not technically a leaf, but it basically is a leaf. It's just a bigger, platier leaf, and then eventually the tree stops making these other, you know, these other smaller ones, and it just like becomes kind of a different looking thing. And that's how you can tell it apart from the halicoa, because halicoa does not do that. So pretty excited about this one. You know, it seems to be loving life in that spot, and it has some, you know, native friends around it, and quite a few non-native plants that I should maybe cut back and try and give it a little bit more space and resources and everything. And then I wanted to talk about these guys over here. This is Mauna'ōhi, which is an amazing endemic plant, very endangered, and honestly it's kind of ridiculous that we don't see this plant everywhere in people's yards and planted out everywhere, because it's easy to grow, easy to propagate, and it's gorgeous. And this is our state flower. So this is a yellow hibiscus, and it's not to be confused with the tons and tons of other yellow hibiscus varieties that are mostly from, you know, Chinese species, so non-native hibiscus species. And there's definitely a huge amount of confusion online and in real life of, you know, oh, the Hawaii state flower is the yellow hibiscus. Well, it's not any yellow hibiscus, it's this one, the Mauna'ōhi hibiscus Brackenridgei. And we're a little late on this one as far as flowering goes. My dad sent me some photos a few weeks ago of these guys just lit up with like tons of yellow flowers. But we're right now kind of seeing the dehiscent phase. And you know, you can see these seeds. So each one of these capsules has like 15, 20 seeds in them. You know, this is a really, really important plant, both culturally and ecologically. And it's endangered. And I mean, in the wild, there's very few of them. So we need to start planting these things. You can see this one is doing really well. It's got like a nice woody trunk. Nice woody trunk. It's definitely entering the dry phase here. Like really small little leaves, which have this fuzzy indumentum. Everything's kind of fuzzy, which helps protect it from water loss during the drought or during the dry season. But just a really incredibly amazing plant, and you know, it grows really fast. You know, I can't say enough good things about this plant. I love Mauna'ōhi. This one kind of looks, you know, really sparse or whatever. It's kind of, you know, in a wetter climate, they grow real thick and lush and fast. You know, in this dry climate, they're kind of like a little bit struggling. You know, and then you got to remember that the soil is pretty much depleted. You know, the soil's been washed away down to like the subsoil, so it's not really good soil. And it doesn't have the whole supporting structure of a native ecosystem. So it might be struggling a little bit, but you know, it still was able to flower and make tons and tons of seeds. So that's good. So, and then moving sort of back down again, this is a nio. This is a native plant. They call it false sandalwood. And it's a really, really incredible native plant, only found here in Hawaii. And it is almost entirely disappeared from the landscape. But you can see that it's absolutely loving life here on this hillside. Just kind of left alone. You know, every once in a while my dad kind of sprays it with the hose or something, but you know, you can see that it's flowering and producing little fruits all over. And this plant smells so good, like the sweetest honey, and it's just incredible. These tiny little white flowers, they just smell so good. You can smell this plant from like 50 feet away. And there are stories that, you know, the early Europeans that came, they sailed here, could smell that plant from like miles offshore. So I'm pretty stoked about this guy. There's actually sort of two of them in here, but they're both identical. They're just cuttings. from the same plant, so you know they're getting along. It's affected by this thrips. You can kind of see this leaf here, but not too bad. So really happy about that. This is sort of the more upland variety. You know, it has more of an upright, shrubby structure. And in some places in Hawaii, these grow as like trees, you know. This is an incredibly variable plant. And we also have a ground cover version called Mauna'ōhi. Mauna'ōhi down here, kind of struggling. Kind of hard to see it. But yeah, this is the leaves right here. Definitely slightly different shaped leaves, and you know, it has a totally different habit. It crawls around on the ground, sprawling around. So I'm gonna have to clear out some of this guinea grass out here and you know, give it some space, but it seems to be doing okay. So it's good to have some more, you know, varieties and genetic diversity. And these are non-native ornamental dracaenas, and I'll probably try and remove them at some point. They're not doing any harm or anything, and they're, you know, they're creating shade and habitat, so for now they're okay. But if left alone, they'll get absolutely massive, and they don't really have a tendency to like spread, but still it just doesn't quite match the aesthetic. I mean, this is just a ridiculous, you know, ornamental variety of dracaena from someplace in the world, I don't know. So I'll probably remove that. And then, you know, looking around, one of the major sort of weedy non-native species that we're seeing pop up at this site is this indigo plant. This is the exact plant that you make indigo, like blue jeans and stuff from, I believe. So it's an incredibly prolific, really fast growing legume, and it makes thousands of seeds. Each one of these little banana shaped seed pod contains whatever, like 10 seeds. So I mean, we're talking like, that's like 100, 200 seeds right there. There are thousands of seeds on each one of these guys. And they're everywhere, they're popping up. You know, I sort of made the mistake of like mulching them, and then like I wood chipped them down and then spread that around, and I think all the seeds survived. But you know, they're building soil, and they're holding down the soil and creating shade. And I don't think they compete too well with, you know, in the shade or anything. So once you get these native species, these native trees starting to shade them out, they're not really going to be much of a problem. But yeah, you can see that indigo is really spread everywhere. A lot of them, they can grow back, right? So if you cut them down at the base, they'll probably survive that and re-sprout. And then just sort of transporting these branches around somewhere, those seeds are going to fall out, and it's definitely a challenge. But you know, they're creating lots of biomass, building soil, and we're gonna hopefully use that to our advantage. So in here on this little terrace, you can see this other plant over here. This is called ma'o. You know, the same ma'o as in ma'ohahele, but this is a different species. It's a Hawaiian cotton. It's in the same genus as cotton, and you know, it makes these really gorgeous yellow flowers, which I think these are buds, and these flowers are going to open soon. So hopefully I'll get some shots of that. And then it makes these really cool, like fuzzy seed pods, you know, with cotton surrounding the seeds, and it's kind of like a nice brown cotton, rusty brown. Here's one of the old ones from last year, a little seed capsule where the seeds fell out. Let's see if I can find them. They're down here. So this is one of last year's little fuzzy ma'o seeds, you know, and hopefully they'll sort of sprout. One thing about them though is that they're definitely more of a coastal plant. You know, this is maybe not quite the appropriate habitat for them, but they're doing fine here and they're native, you know, and we're not far from the coast. You know, I'll see like seabirds flying over. I mean, the ocean's right over there. So, you know, and then if we're thinking long term, we are melting the ice caps and the ocean is going to go up hundreds of feet in the next few tens of thousands of years back to a high stand, which it used to be. I can't remember the exact date, but like, you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago, the ocean was much higher and the shoreline actually came much closer to where we are now. Still, we're still not really be in a coastal setting here, but you know, I like this plant, Ma'o. It reminds me of my grandparents on Molokai. They're the ones who taught me about this plant. And then, like I was saying earlier, not being so worried about, you know, getting the exact right species right from the beginning. We're just doing what we can to increase the diversity. You know, above all, we favor the appropriate native plants that would have existed on this hillside probably. But if there's, you know, others that can survive here, then we'll happily try them out. And then right here, you can see at the base of this plant, the base of this ma'o, there's quite a few things going on. There's these little weeds here and there, but if you have a keen eye, you'll see there's this plant right here. This guy, Mauna'ōhi. It's a member of the Convolvulaceae family. It's basically a small, sprawling ground cover morning glory. And they are, well, we're still deciding, I guess, that they're still trying to figure it out, but they are thought to be endemic, basically. Originally, they were, you know, thought to be maybe an indigenous species because a close relative is found elsewhere in the tropics and stuff. So, but then, you know, I think they did some like DNA testing and figured out that no, this is probably its own species. Mauna'ōhi, Jacomantia sandwicensis. Originally it was Jacomantia ovalifolia. But yeah, like I said, I think they're figuring out that it's its own endemic species. But so you can see it's able to survive and it's sort of spreading around down here. So I'm pretty stoked about that. You know, we definitely want to encourage more native ground covers to kind of spread around. That's also more of a coastal plant. Like I said, we're kind of working with what we got here, and the more the better. You know, the more diversity the better, in my opinion. And this is also just a really lovely plant. It makes these kind of like white, slightly bluish purple tinted flowers, little morning glory flowers, and it's just a really nice ground cover. So I'm gonna try to propagate more of that. It's looking a little sparse, but I'm happy to see that it's crawling around. Like, you know, it's starting to sprawl out, and it can reroot. So, you know, each branch that kind of that it sends out can then reroot again, and it can create this nice mat on the ground. So that's a really nice one. And then if I can manage to get over there without eating it. So in here is a plant that I love. It's called ule. It's a member of the rose family. So yeah, ule is really cool indigenous plant. But it's a member of the rose family, Rosaceae. And this is another plant that is highly variable. you know, in its morphology here in Hawaii. You know, typically you get this kind of sprawling, shrubby, almost ground cover kind of form, which is what this one is. You know, it's got these like long branches that kind of just shoot out. But you know, when I lived on the Big Island, I was seeing this plant in certain locations growing as a tree, like 15, 20 plus feet with a big woody trunk. I think that's less common, but I really like this plant, ule. It makes these beautiful white flowers. You know, it's in the rose family, but there's no like thorns or anything. It's just kind of a nice, gentle plant. And you know, they'll spread out quite a bit. This one's getting pretty big here. And this is one of the species that I've found, you know, when I've hiked up these ridges and up into the mountains here. There are still ule up there in these little clusters, you know, together with a'ali'i and ilima and a couple other native plants. So that's kind of interesting. Definitely the appropriate area, you know, appropriate species for this habitat, because like I said, they're still up there, the original native plants. So really hoping to propagate more of these around this site. We have this one right here, and then we got another one down there that I can show you. But yeah, one of my favorites for sure, ule. It's too bad right now it's not really flowering, but spectacular. I love these leaves and branches and everything. And it's really good to see this one doing so well. So let's see, what else do we have here? I guess we can talk about these trees. These are pink trumpet trees, Tabebuya. I can't remember the species, but these are non-native. I think they're considered invasive. They spread, you know, they have these like wind dispersed seeds that can kind of like helicopter far, you know, distances. And I'm pretty sure this whole grove of them are descendant from our neighbor's tree right there, which is actually flowering. So you can see this pink flower, that's the pink trumpet tree. And they get huge, like 50 plus feet tall. And then, yeah, like I said, their seeds can just fly in the wind and land up here. And they're pretty fast growing. You know, it's one of these pioneering species. And supposedly the wood is kind of good. Like I think they were introduced here as partly ornamental, but also partly for, you know, fast growing lumber or firewood or something like that. And I've been experimenting with like pollarding them, which is when you chop kind of all the branches at about head height, and you know, you just leave like the trunk and they'll re-sprout. So you can see I did this. This was about 2 years ago, I think. I chopped this down to just this standing trunk, and then all of this material re-sprouted. And we can theoretically repeatedly do that. This would not be the right time though. Like you would want to do this at the start of the wet season. So in the fall, we could come through, you know, cut these down, you know, chip these or just kind of chop them up and leave them on the ground as mulch. And that'll open up more light, you know, during the cooler wet season, when there's not as much, you know, stress from the sunlight and everything. So, and then during the wet season, they will re-sprout, you know, and grow long. And by the dry season, they'll be providing shade. But kind of the weird thing about them is that they are drought deciduous. So in the summer, they drop all their leaves. But, you know, they're still kind of providing shade even without the leaves. But yeah, they drop tons of leaves. So like they're creating a lot of mulch, you know, creating soil. And they already exist kind of just everywhere. So I'm not too concerned about like, you know, eradicating them. If we were to cut down all of the ones on our property, there are still all of these other ones on our neighbor's property and like up there on the hillside. So there's not much I can do, you know, except for to try to use them to our advantage. And, you know, they provide lots of good shade, lots of mulch. The birds love them. It's good habitat for now. And the plan is to just sort of phase them out over time as native trees grow big and sort of replace their, you know, that role of the canopy. But it's good to have some trees, you know, for now. So, and then let's see what else we have. There are all kinds of things happening. So, and then over here, we have a lot of these plants called Ilima. And once again, this is another highly variable endemic species in the Malvaceae family. So, you know, we got a lot of members, a lot of representation from the Malvaceae family, cotton family, hibiscus, you know. And this is one of them that is beloved here in Hawaii. Makes great little flowers. And like I was saying, it's highly variable. So, you know, on the Big Island and, you know, in certain locations, it grows almost like a tree. And then, you know, these ones are kind of your typical shrubby style ones. But then there's also these like ground cover varieties and more coastal varieties, which we also have one. We have a different variety down there, and I'll show you that in a bit. But, you know, this is a plant that exists here. It's able to survive here and there, up on the hillside and around here. So I'm trying to encourage that, you know, local population, that local ecotype. But we're also introducing a couple, you know, other varieties and just trying to increase the diversity. And this one was quite prolific. I think there's about 3 of them right in this little area. You can see this one has a pretty good woody stem. And then, you know, it makes these gorgeous flowers and then these little seed capsule that, you know, they contain like 5 seeds each. So looks like, you know, hundreds of seeds formed and then fell out. And actually I can see some seedlings down there, which for me is really exciting. Let me see if I can get over there. Because, you know, the whole idea of this is like, okay, you can plant some native plants, great. But if they just, you know, end up dying or something, then that's not ideal, right? So if they can reproduce on their own, and you can start to, you know, get a little population of them going, then that would be amazing. So that's kind of one of the things that I'm most excited about on this trip here, is very carefully looking around in the understory for native plant seedlings. And there's one right here. So that is an Ilima seedling. Right at the base of this Ilima. So it looks like the seeds are just falling. Look, here's a bunch of them. It's really great. 1, 2, 3. Oh man, there's a bunch of them in there. And then there's a few other things that are not Ilima in here. Look, here's an Ilima. Here's not, these are not Ilimas. But that's really promising. You know, that's one of the critical things that people who do native habitat restoration are looking for. It's called recruitment. You know, you can go out and plant all you want native plants, but if they're not able to reproduce on their own, then, well, you know, it's not going to work out. So it's really promising to see recruitment like this, you know, in this natural regeneration. And each of these little seedlings are genetically unique. You know, These are different than their parents, and oh, here's one right here too. So theoretically, you know, over time, after, you know, quite a few generations, you'll notice, you know, that they start to become more adapted to this specific site, because the ones that do better are slightly better adapted, and then they create more seeds, right? So it's evolution essentially, on a certain scale. But yeah, you know, and then there's a lot of them in here now that I'm looking. They're probably not easy to spot from this video, but there are quite a few little seedlings in here. So I'm gonna have to be really careful not to, you know, step on them or rip them out when I'm coming in here and doing a little work later. And then, you know, the other one that I noticed in here is a seedling of a really special tree called Willy Willy. The Willy Willy tree might have been the dominant canopy species in this area, or at least a major component of the canopy, you know, before humans came along. I don't know for sure, but I do know that there are pockets here and there of, you know, remnant Willy Willy forest in this area. There are some over on Coco Crater. There's some over in New Valley and stuff. It's a really interesting member of the legume family. They're called coral trees, erythrina. And Willy Willy is the endemic erythrina here in Hawaii. So let me see, there's one up here on this terrace that lost its leaves. You know, it's a drought deciduous plant, so in the summer it drops all of its leaves and it just kind of looks dead, and a lot of people kind of freak out or something and like rip them out and think they're dead, but they're just dormant, you know, they're just waiting it out, and when the rains return, the leaves come back and they flower and they make these beautiful orange flowers. And you know, there's a lot of cultural significance to it. The legend goes that when the Willy Willy are flowering is when the tiger sharks are most active and dangerous. So, you know, that's kind of a time of year that you want to be extra careful in the ocean. I don't know how much truth there is, but, you know, it probably just like coincides with their mating season or something like that. But, you know, and then the seeds themselves were very valuable for making lei, and the wood is extremely light and buoyant, right? So they were used in like making canoes, like the ama, which is just like the outrigger part of the canoe that, you know, like extremely buoyant and stuff like that. So it's very culturally significant and very ecologically significant. And it's definitely a tragedy that they have disappeared from the landscape. There's a really incredible location on the big island of Hawaii called the Waikoloa Dry Forest. And if you ever get a chance to visit, I highly recommend it. It's like stepping back in time to a Hawaii that existed before humans, and especially before, you know, Europeans. And, you know, it's a major component of the Hawaiian tropical dry forest ecosystem, which, like I mentioned earlier, there's only a few % of that remaining. So our hope is that those will become the dominant canopy species here on this site. You know, and we've started them in pots from seed, and, you know, wait till they get big enough and plant those, and those have been doing the best. But I've also just thrown seeds up here, like broadcasted seeds, and that's where I think this one came from. This guy doesn't look like much, and this one may or may not survive, because like I said, this is probably just not the ideal method. it's very dry and hot up here, and the soil is all degraded. So it's better to start them in pots and wait till they get big enough and then plant them in the ground. But I'll go show you our bigger ones down there. They're doing really good. They're getting quite big, and they look like they're gonna survive, and they can live for hundreds of years and grow to enormous proportions. And my dream is one day we will have willy trees here with, you know, native shrubs and ground covers and a couple other native trees scattered around, and, you know, recreate the native forest that was once here. All right, and then I want to talk about another plant that is sort of wild in this area. It's called uhaloa, Waltheria indica. It's another member of the Malvaceae family, you know, cotton family, and it existed on this site, and it, you know, is one of these rare sort of native plants that is able to compete with the invasive vegetation. When I say rare, I don't mean like it's a rare plant. I just mean that, you know, most of the native plants are just not able to compete at all with the non-native vegetation. And usually the ones that can are the indigenous ones that are found elsewhere in the world. So they're a little bit more, you know, cosmopolitan maybe. They got a little bit more, they're a little bit more used to all these other plants. So uhaloa is found, you know, it's pretty widespread actually all around the world. And it has a lot of uses, you know, medicinal and all of that. They're pretty short-lived little shrubs. This one's kind of as big as they get, and then they die, but they make tons of seeds, you know. And like I was saying, this one existed on this site before. There's a bunch of them kind of growing on this really shallow soil, this rocky outcrop over here. This is uhaloa, this is uhaloa, all of that is uhaloa. You know, and it's really critically like important. It's important for, you know, pollinators and all of that. So trying to encourage as much of that as we can. And they're doing pretty good. Okay, I just saw something down here that I want to talk about. There's another plant that appears to have sprouted from one of the seeds that I broadcast, right? So I threw a bunch of just random, not really random, but, you know, the appropriate dryland species seeds all around here just to kind of see what happens, you know. And, you know, it's better to start them in pots and everything and get them going, but if they can sprout on their own out here and grow, that's a good sign. And it's really hard to see this one in here. I'm gonna have to clear all the grass around it, but, you know, here's our Mauna'ōhi. Here's a uhaloa. Here's some of that pesky guinea grass. But look at this guy coming up here, this vine, right? Here he is. And what I should do is I should remove this guinea grass, which this vine, which I'm pretty sure this is a viki. This is another member of the legume family, but it's a jack bean, Cannivalia. And we actually have quite a few native, you know, endemic species of this. You know, it's a vine, and then it creates these, you know, classic like bean flowers and bean pods. And I can see it over here, over there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove this guinea grass very carefully, unwind this guy, and then wind them up the Mauna'ōhi. And like, that is absolutely amazing. Like, that's the start of, you know, a layered polyculture. You've got your, you know, a shrubby layer and some vines going up it, and it all starts to bind together, right? So that is really exciting because I'm pretty sure I just scattered that, you know, seed and it sprouted on its own, and it seems to be able to compete and survive up here for now. We'll try and give it a little help, a little encouragement, and, you know, send it up this Mauna'ōhi. So that's a viki. I think it's Canavalia Hawaiiensis, maybe. I don't know. There's like 15 different species, and I can't remember which one I have, but it's really exciting to see some native plants just sprouting on their own up here. So yeah, I gotta tread carefully, walk around, watch where I'm stepping, because there are native plants, little seedlings sprouting up. And then you come over here, I'll probably talk about this guy. You know, I'll talk about this. This is probably the weirdest plant we have on this site. I mean, I don't know, they're all pretty weird. So yeah, this is one of the weirdest ones. This is called ihi. It's Portulaca molokiniensis, right? So this is a succulent plant. There's a lot of portulacas around the world, and we have an indigenous one, which is more common, and it's actually growing up here on these rocks over here. But this one is interesting because it's thought to be descendant from, you know, that more common one that I just mentioned. But this is from a small offshore island called Molokini. It's just incredible that, like, somehow that little island out there was just isolated enough, and the seeds from the original species that made it there, you know, they started to diverge, and it became this much larger and weirder version of that. But this is a classic example, one of the best examples of just the incredible endemism in Hawaii. You know, you get one seed coming over, and then it, you know, lands in some really isolated island or valley or, you know, location, and then, you know, some time passes and suddenly you have like 12 different species or something. That's called adaptive radiation, and this is sort of like one of the examples of that. But this is a really kind of a fun plant. Definitely more of a coastal plant, and like I said, it only existed on that one offshore island off of Maui. So probably not exactly appropriate for this site, but it's just fun to have and experiment with. You know, so that's ihi, and it makes these like nice little yellow flowers, and you know, these are like just these most like very succulent stems. I could break a stem off and probably stick it in a pot or stick it somewhere else, and it'll grow into a new plant. It looks like it's kind of re-sprouting from the base, which is cool. So anyway, that's ihi, probably one of the most obscure, weirdest plants we have here. So, and then over here we have like a bunch of different kinds of grasses. I still haven't really identified all of them. And there are some native grasses, and you know, there aren't really like native grasslands. They don't form like full grasslands usually in Hawaii. So, you know, the grass is kind of seen as the enemy, maybe. And I'm gonna try and outcompete it, but I'm not gonna spend too much energy pulling out grass because it's just gonna come back. The best way that I've found is to try to outcompete it, you know, shade it out, just focus on getting some trees, you know, and then start to push it out with like, you know, shrubs and everything. So, and the guinea grass and stuff, it grows fast, so, you know, you pull it or you cut it, and then you have a lot of mulch, which is nice. So there's advantages. But yeah, guinea grass and some of these other grasses are just one of the most obnoxious invasive plants in the world. You know, it's taking over Texas. It's taking over like huge areas of the Southwest. Buffalo grass too, we have that up here. Okay, and then I just noticed another thing. It really takes a minute. You gotta just sit here and look around down here in the understory. Because here's a plant that is absolutely incredible. One of the rarest plants in the entire world. And I'm not even exaggerating. There are like 10 of these remaining in the wild. This is Uhi, Mesoneuron cavaiensis. It's in the legume family, as you can tell, probably. Uhi. It just is like this kind of slow growing, kind of finicky, kind of tough to grow. Eventually it gets pretty big. Like it can grow probably like 15, 20 feet tall, kind of like a big sprawling, shrubby kind of thing. But it makes these ridiculous flowers, like these bright red flowers. And it makes this really hard wood. So really hard, really dense. The wood was good for, making tools, like digging tools and stuff. This one I planted, I can't remember if I grew it as a seed in a pot and then transplanted it here, or if I just stuck it, like, if I just stuck a seed in the ground here. I kind of think I just stuck the seed in the ground right here. And then I noticed this plant last year, and you can see I put like some rock mulch. It's like coral rock mulch around it. And it's still alive. Hopefully there are others around too. There were some others, so I gotta be really careful not to trample them and, give these guys some more space and light. But this one's kind of under the protection of this Nile here, which is cool. And then you'll notice over here one of these giant African snails. That's just the shell. I think it died. But those guys are real bad. They come and they eat all of our insanely endemic, rare tree snails, like land snails. Hawaii has like some of the most ridiculous diversity of land snails in the world, or at least we did, until, all of this devastation has occurred and most of them have gone extinct and the rest of them are like on their way. And it's a lot of it to do with these other snails, these non-native invasive snails that just come and eat them, so that's just how it is here. Anyway, so that's good to see this uhi growing here, and it looks like it's in a really good spot to me, so that's promising. It's incredibly rare, critically endangered, like hard to find. They still grow on the Big Island, but like I said, there's like 9 individuals left in the wild or something crazy. And it's another one that we just need to plant more. Like we need to get that into people's yards. We need to outplant them into their habitat. Critically endangered, on the brink of extinction. So if we can get some growing here, that would be great. All right, so then come in down here on this bottom terrace down here. Here's an ule, another one of those rose family plants. Right up here against this Ilima papa, which is that, Ilima, but this is kind of like the coastal ground cover version, which is cool. And these two can kind of mesh together into like a ground cover, and that would be great. And then over here, we've got this kind of large rock wall that I built, and it's creating this little terrace. And we have a native endemic hibiscus right here, Kokio ula ula, which is like a red hibiscus flower. And like once again, like what I was talking about with the Mauna'ōhi, it's just kind of ridiculous that we don't have this, that you don't see this everywhere. Like when you're driving around here, you just see tons of hibiscus and none of them are the native ones. We have these incredible native endemic, like found nowhere else in the world. And, you know, hibiscus is easy to grow, easy to propagate. It's beautiful. So I just can't figure it out. Like what are we thinking? Planting just all these other varieties and like, I don't know. We got to get our shit together. People need to start planting these and, you know, choosing these over the other kinds. This one's kind of freaky. It's like it kind of fell over and then resprouted, sort of. A little bit struggling. Oh, and then down here at the base is a plant called Ala Ala Vainui Vahine. So Ala Ala Vainui Vahine is a member of the genus Plectranthus, which is in the mint family, Lamiaceae. And you know, it creates this like pleasant sort of fuzzy leaves with these little purple flowers. So there's one right here. You know, it's very small, doesn't look too big. And then there's some more over here. These two little guys. So I mean, it's good to see that they're hanging on. They're still alive. I'll see what I can do to try to encourage them a little better because they're like right on the brink of dying. But those would be a good ground cover. You know, they're just like this little fuzzy, little herbaceous plants, and you know, they create tons of little seeds that can spread around, and they're definitely appropriate for this habitat. It's one of the species that I have seen hanging on in these highly invaded, degraded lands. You know, you'll see them like kind of growing out of a rock crack, or like, you know, on like a kind of a shadier mossy rock or something like that. So that's why I sort of have them here in the understory next to these rocks. But yeah, you gotta let your eyes adjust. You know, stick your head into the understory of these shrubs and start looking around at the different leaves. And every once in a while, I'll see something that's, oh, you know, that's something that I planted or that I scattered seeds. That's a native plant, and we want to encourage that. So that's really promising to see that that thing's still alive. I can actually see some more of it under the Ilima over there. So really good to see Ala Ala Vainui Vahine. I love that plant. And then coming over here, continuing along this rock wall, there's some non-native, you know, we got this guinea grass. And then, you know, this is a, it's called a Mickey Mouse plant. It's another invasive non-native plant. I'll probably chop it out at some point. And then over here, there's another Mauna'ōhi with a nice thick trunk and some healthy branches coming out. It's about 4 feet tall, but it can get a lot bigger than that. And yeah, it was totally lit up with flowers, and now they have turned to seed capsules here. Let's see if I can show you that. So we got plenty Mauna'ōhi seeds. You know, I'm just gonna kind of scatter them around and see what happens. And then over here we got this plant. This is called hala tree. This is another very kind of bizarre tropical plant. You know, you see a lot of them in like Australia, I think, and you know, this one's endemic to Hawaii. It's in kind of its own family, Pandanaceae. But yeah, it's got these kind of serrated leaves that will cut you kind of badly if you know, brush it wrong. And these get pretty big. Like this will grow into a big tree one day. And you can see that it's starting to get more upright. It sends out these kind of like support roots, you know, and then it starts to stand upright and get bigger and bigger. And this is definitely one of the most culturally significant plants. it has many, many uses and a lot of significance in Hawaiian culture. And it's actually my school's like mascot. It's kind of funny. You know, a lot of schools will have like the wolves, or like they're like the wolverines. There's some like gnarly falcon bird that, you know, bird of prey. Whereas my school, we were a tree. Our mascot is a tree. So yeah, hala tree. Potentially this is not the appropriate habitat. I guess they're more of like the windward side, maybe like they form these nice forests on the coast. But you know, this one seems to be happy here, and I'm more than happy to allow it to grow. So that one is really nice. So yeah, we're definitely seeing some successes. And then, you know, I'm only here for a short time, but I want to do some work. And what I'm thinking is, you know, going around to where our native plants are and pulling out the grass around them. I'm not worrying too much about grass that's just out, you know, not next to any of our plants. So, you know, being very careful to sort of surgically remove the grass and the non-native vegetation that is competing with our native plants, and being really careful not to crush any little seedlings that, you know, might be native or might be something that we want to encourage, and then controlling some of these, you know, more aggressive weedy species, but also just trying to be kind of light-handed, because as we enter the dry season, things get really fragile. You know, like I gotta be careful of not disturbing things too much, and you know, creating such a disturbance that there's like bare earth. You know, as we enter the dry season, this is like the most critical. There's the most stress on the plants. So it's actually, I think it's probably good to have some of this, even guinea grass, you know, shading the soil out here, rather than just trying to pull everything and leaving barren earth as we enter the dry season. Like that's probably like the worst thing I could do. So, you know, I'll come in here and like, here's an indigo plant that's kind of encroaching on our aveo and our kauaia, and I'll probably snip that guy, chop him up, drop that. And I might leave some of these other guys, and you know, just start to open it up around our native plants and give them some space. But like I was saying in the beginning, I think it was good to just kind of leave it and let things go. Even all these like kind of weedy invasive species, just let things go the way they want to go, and then kind of see what's happening, you know, see what the natural regeneration is like. But you know, definitely like removing this guinea grass, which is encroaching on this whole area, and really trying to focus on these small areas, these little like nucleus, you know, these nuclei of like native plants, and then not worrying too much about all the other areas, you know, and come back another time. So yeah, down here we have kind of a different thing going on. We've been working on this area for a long time. You know, up there we had kind of left that alone for a long time and only started working on that about 6 years ago. Whereas down here we've been working on for like 20 something years. You know, this was all guinea grass when we moved in, or like, you know, a couple other random things. So it's been a long process of trying to establish other plants. You know, one of the main plants that we're using down here is a indigenous plant called naupaka. You know, it's a very widespread plant. It's native to a lot of regions around the world. You know, its little white berries can float across the ocean, land on a beach, and then sprout. So yeah, it's another one of these more coastal species. You know, slightly outside of its context here, but you know, this plant is really interesting. Like I said, it's really widespread around the world. But when its seeds arrived in Hawaii, you know, a couple million years ago probably, it underwent adaptive radiation and a bunch of new species formed. So we have lots of these upland varieties, you know, of naupaka. And then we also have stuff like this is a tea leaf, a tea plant. And, you know, this is a really culturally significant plant. It's a canoe crop that the Polynesians brought over. It also has a lot of uses. You know, and then we have some aloe in there, which is good for, you know, sunburns and burns and everything. And then we have this oyster plant. You know, this is not a native plant, but it's just a fun plant to have around. And then all kinds of random things. Here's some random agave. We did not plant that. So, you know, this is kind of more just random stuff down here. But then, you know, I've been slowly sort of encouraging my dad to plant more native stuff. And we've been planting more and more native species. So, you know, kind of in this area mostly. So naupaka, that's a native. And then this one of my favorites of all time. It's called Pohinahina, Vitex rotundifolia. You know, and it's a member of the mint family. And it's this kind of like sprawling, vining plant. Definitely also more of a coastal plant. This will just grow straight out of the sand on the beach. And it smells really good. In fact, it reminds me, this one also reminds me of my grandparents in Molokai, because on the beach, kind of by their house, this would grow. And, you know, I associate the smell with that childhood. But yeah, it makes these like really gorgeous little mint leaves here. And the leaves are all fuzzy and they just smell so good, so fragrant. You know, and you can see that it just kind of spreads around. Here's like this big woody trunk that it's formed as it's sprawling and just crawling around, and you can kind of just chop it up, you know, prune it, and it doesn't seem to mind. Really easy to propagate. This one is actually quite common in landscaping, so is the naupaka. So, you know, this is one of those native plants that you actually do see quite commonly in landscaping. You know, so that's good. Here's another naupaka down here. This one's kind of big. And yesterday there was a bird hanging out in here, enjoying that space. Here's a papaya tree. So lots of random things. We're trying to grow food too. We have banana trees kind of down more on the other side of the house. And then we have this wax ficus plant, which is really good at stabilizing the soil, but we're actually kind of trying to phase it out. It's just it just keeps spreading, and it's a little too aggressive. And I mean, it's nice, but you know, it's not native, and we're trying to slowly replace it with more and more native plants. So right here is a really, really interesting plant that we're trying to get, you know, trying to grow on this site. This is called kokio, and this is probably one of the most rare and endangered species in the whole world. Less than 10 individuals left in the wild, critically endangered, you know, on the brink of extinction. And it's a member of the Malvaceae family. It's in its own genus. Actually, there's a few others in. They're all endemic to Hawaii. You know, the whole genus is endemic to Hawaii. I think one of them went extinct, and that one was actually found near here. So that one was only recorded once. Like they saw one individual of it and then never again. And that was like right over there. And this one is probably the most common one. And by that, I mean there's like 9 left in the wild. And then there's like 1 or 2 other species. There's like one from Kauai and one, I forget. But anyway, this is a really rare dryland species. Hawaiian tree cotton is kind of another common name. Coquia gynareoides is the scientific name. I just call it coquio. You know, and it's this tree that makes these really crazy red flowers, but it's just really, really rare and endangered. It's kind of a struggle to grow. Like as you can see, it's just this stick right now. It's not rooted very well, so that's the problem with this guy. He's still alive. It's definitely still alive, and it's not that abnormal to see it just as a stick. Like, you know, it's one of these dryland species that can kind of hang out in the dormant phase. But the issue, I think, is sort of somehow it kind of got loose, and I need to go in there and like try to secure it, you know, give it a little bit more soil, a little bit more secure, maybe some rocks over here or something. I think it's barely holding on. It's just been like this, like a stick for months. So yeah, we're gonna have to do some work on this little area. Hopefully try to save this one. But we have a few more in pots, little seedlings. But yeah, this is one that's, you know, federally listed critically endangered species. Previously, you know, in Hawaii and anywhere, you're not allowed to possess these types of plants, right? But in the past few years, they passed a law that was like, you know, basically we have to start growing these. You know, we have to get these into the hands of as many people as we can and start planting them out in people's yards. So there are, now you can, you know, you can get these plants from certified growers. So if you can get your hands on one of these and then try and, you know, grow it, you should definitely do that. Coquio, this is one of the most rare and endangered plants in the whole world. We're probably the only people who have this plant, you know, certainly in this valley, but probably, you know, on like this whole side of the island. I mean, I don't know for sure. Somebody else probably has one. There's, you know, plant nerds out there, but it seems like 99.9% of the population, people just don't care. They don't know about it. They don't care. They go about their business. You know, they haven't the slightest idea. So we're trying to spread the word, trying to educate, and then really just trying to get these plants on the landscape so that people see them, they ask like, oh, what is that? And you can tell them, and you just get them interested, and, you know, because they're just completely absent from the landscape. And it's just such a shame. I really don't get it. We've got the most incredible diversity of endemic plants in the world here. And people choose to plant all this non-native stuff, this invasive stuff. And like, nobody plants native plants. Every once in a while you drive around and you see someone's house and it's like, okay, that person knows, because you can see they have like a couple native plants. But, you know, like I said, like 99% of people, they're still buying invasive plants from Home Depot, sticking them in the ground. They don't care. They just don't know. So we need to kind of change the culture, you know, and we need to start growing these plants before it's too late. I kind of think of it as like, you know, almost like Noah's Ark or something. Like, we're about to go through, or we are going through, a massive bottleneck all across the world, in many different ways. Just species are dying out left and right, you know, and there's a genetic bottleneck happening where we're losing diversity, and everything is getting squeezed down into this small, you know, pool of genetic diversity. So we really need to start to reverse that and sort of ferry these plants. You know, we need to ferry them through this extinction crisis. It's looking pretty bleak, but, you know, I'm trying to be hopeful. And it's really nice to see some of these rare endemic plants doing just fine on their own up there on the hillside. And here's one. Here's our most glorious Willy Willy tree right here. This is Erythrina sandwicensis. It's a coral tree. It's an endemic species. This one's about 3 years old, grown from a seed, which is collected from a local ecotype. One of those little crumbs of habitat remaining where there are some mature willy trees that are still hanging on. And you can get, some of the seeds and just start growing your own. And, there's lots of like variations on this plant. If you go to like different islands and stuff, it's all considered one species, but some of them have like orange flowers, some of them have like white flowers, and just kind of different shades and shapes and habits and everything. But this is our local Oahu variety, I guess. And you can see it has these gnarly thorns on it. And the interesting thing about those thorns is you only see them on the plant when it's young like this, and when it gets old, you don't see those thorns anymore, because it just doesn't need it here in Hawaii. Like a lot of things that arrived here in Hawaii and then evolved here, they basically lost all their defenses because there was no need, right? We don't have large herbivores munching on them, and so the plant doesn't need to put that energy into those thorns anymore. But yeah, so I mean, it doesn't look like much, and it has these small little leaves. I think it dropped off some of its leaves because we're ending the dry season, but it still has this green stem capable of photosynthesis. It's nice and thick, it can hold on to its moisture in there. And this one is looking really healthy. It's got this thick trunk, and it's about 3-4 feet tall now. There's another one right over there, and then we have a few more up there, and then we also have some more in pots that are ready to go out into the ground. So hopefully one day we'll have a massive tree here. Come back in 300 years and you'll have a huge tree right here. So it's really exciting, and I just want to get people excited about it, and I want to document sort of this process, because I'm just sort of experimenting with this process here, and converting a non-native invasive grassland back into some sort of native forest. And there's probably a lot of different methods, and people probably would disagree about certain methods, and everyone would have a different approach. So I think it's important to document what I've been doing over the past 6 years, and we're starting to see some successes, and hopefully those continue long term. So yeah, anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, hope you learned something, and I hope it gets you kind of excited. I'll make some more videos over the next few days after I've done some work in here, and you'll be able to kind of better see the native vegetation that's starting to establish in here. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, hope you learned something, and I'll try and make some more videos sometime soon. Aloha.